Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Long ways from home. Long ways from home. True believer. Long ways from home, long ways from home.
Dear friends, it's a pleasure to be here and have a possibility to talk with you about things that I find very concrete and interesting. Question of memory, also in connection to therapy, psychotherapy, and to writing. I have lots of experience about these things, writing many books and working as a therapist for about 20 years. And also thinking a lot about how the memory works when I'm writing. For a writer, there are different sources that are very important when you try to write. Of course, the early memories, childhood, also, of course, other events later in life, but also the world of dreams. For instance, Gunnar Ekelöf, the Swedish poet, says that all poetry, all art comes from dreams, are just developed daydreams or night dreams. Of course, you can oppose this thought, but I think he is at least partly right. When I were in psychotherapy, trying to complete my psychotherapeutic studies, I went to a very experienced therapist. I was there for 6 years and I went about 3 times a week there. And this was in the 80s. At the same time, I worked in an experimental psychiatric ward called Veikkola Sanatorium, which we tried to develop to a sort of therapeutic commune, democratic commune. And then I got half a year free from the work in purpose to write my first novel that I had been thinking of since I was a youth, really. I continued my therapies, and I found it was impossible to combine writing a novel and to be in therapy. I didn't then understand very much what the difficulty was. It was only impossible to write a novel, or also impossible to be fruitfully and developing in the therapy. So these two processes excluded each other. So I didn't know what to do. I tried, of course, many ugly, regressive behaviors, just because I didn't know how to explain my anxiety and my bad thoughts about everything then. I also fled to Mallorca and lived there with too much alcohol for 1 week, I think. I also met a girl there who I found later had the same forename as my therapist for some reason. And then I came back and went to the therapist and tried to explain my difficulties. First, I found out that I must find somebody who is guilty for my difficulties to write. And I thought that a therapist would be very, very suitable for that. So I went there quite angry and full of accusations, but the therapist was very friendly and smiling and very calm. And she said that she understands perfectly my dilemma. And she said that you can take 3 or 4 hours free from the therapy. You don't have to pay for these 3-4 months, which was excellent for me. So we get an appointment with the therapist, and I went home and sat at my table and would write my big novel, who would be a definite critique of the psychiatry systems and ways of handling psychiatric patients. By that time, I was in big opposition to what were done in the big hospitals. But nothing happened. I sat there for 1 week, 2 weeks. Nothing, not a word came to the paper. We had papers by that typewriters, not these Macintosh laptops. So after a while, I started to write. I thought very friendly thoughts about my therapist, and understood that it was not her fault, at least not totally. I had something to do with it myself. So I started to write, and I got an enormous flow. So I wrote my first novel in, I think it was in 3-4 months. It was a hard critique of, as I said, the psychiatric world by then that I found awful and unhuman. And by then I started to realize that the process of being in therapy and the process to write are very close to each other. The only, perhaps a small difference or a big difference is that you have no therapist there. But the process is the same. You try to remember, explore early memories, and you try to remember details and to get formerly unknown areas in your life story enlightened. And this was a very interesting project, because I found out that when I remember my first conscious memories, which belonged to the bombing of Helsinki in the beginning of the 40s, I tried to remember details, and remembering details, it gave some light to new areas around it. So via this one early memory that I wrote down, I found new areas that I could remember. And I found that the memory functions as sort of a telescope. I could, via earlier events, project to earlier events in my life and get new knowledge about myself. Now my therapist said that, okay, she can understand that writing is almost the same as being in therapy, but she said you must not propagate this because it would lead to that I and many other good therapists are without job after that. So I didn't propagate it. But I found out that it functioned quite well. There was one big advance with that because it's much cheaper. The therapy without a therapist is really much cheaper. You can then ask, if you know, as you know, the almost all important things in therapy happens in the transference. You talk to the therapist. Your therapist is 1 week, she is your stubborn father, or other week she is my elder sister, and so on. And before I went to therapy, I thought it was sort of a metaphor, but I found it's very concrete. My therapist, a beautiful, wonderful young lady, not young anymore, but a lady, she really changed to my father, concretely, that to my mother, and so on. So all this was true that I had sort of fairy tale in theory before I started this. So this leads me to the conclusion that I think writing is something that could be very helpful for everybody of us. Especially when we get little bit elderly and we have time to try to reconstruct our lives and to recognize where we have failed, where we have succeeded, which of our dreams have come true and which have not. So I think it has a very big impact on how we see our life. We see a new construction, a new whole construction of our lives via the therapy. That's very important, especially when we think of all the diseases that we get when we get older. I have had my psychotherapeutic training in a Therapia Foundation, which is sort of existential therapeutic school. That we think that every what we call disease, every psychiatric problem means something. It has roots, and it has to do with our former experience in life. The modern psychosomatics really speak today that the body speaks asthma, the body speaks high blood pressure, the body speaks different diseases. I think it's very concrete, and that's also the way it is in reality. I think that perhaps not enough is considered in our medical practice today yet. So when we know a little more about ourselves and the important events in our life, I think we can also know a little more about why we get heart diseases, why we choose to have pain in our back or allergic reactions and so on. My teacher in psychiatry, Martti Siirala, who founded the Terapeia Foundation, he said there are three serious psychiatric diseases. It's schizophrenia, it's a manic depressive disease, and it's cancer. He said that cancer, in his way of thinking, is psychotic disturbance on the cell level. The cells get mad, that they start to proliferate and listen, and they destroy the tissue around them and kills the host or the man. So this was his idea about cancer and the psyche. And these thoughts have been confirmed in many big investigations, especially in the United States, that there are connections between our mental states and the risk of being ill in cancer. For instance, people who have lived long together in marriage, 40, 50, 60 years, when the other one partner dies, it's very usual that the one who stays alive develops cancer as sort of some compensation for the other one who has left her alone. So these are thoughts that I have came to very concretely in work with writing and psychotherapy. The big question is still this: what happens to the transference when you are writing? Of course, you can imagine people that you talk to when you are writing also, but it's not so intimate, it's not so concrete as in therapy, so they can't compensate each other fully. But I should say that writing is a good way of therapy. This was one of the thoughts I wanted to tell you in the words most spoken language, bad English. And now I think I go to the grand piano and we go on with another theme.
A poem by Tua Forsström and set to music by Claes Andersson.
Som kanske strök en vinge mot
friden ska krossas i skärvor av glas, men aldrig en plastmugg i kras. Jag går fram till dig som jag möter, lägger armarna om din hals. Är det du? Innan alla gått hem får jag då lov till en vals, men du märker ingenting alls. Jag känner mig så övergiven av det öde som jag trodde var mitt liv, som kanske strök en vinge mot min hals, men jag märkte ingenting alls. A few months ago, I received a letter from a lady who had seen me participating in a TV panel a few years ago. The discussion was about childhood experiences of sexual abuse and disclosure of such abuse, also about false memories of abuse that never occurred, but with memory creating such events. And apparently, ever since then, she had thought about writing me. What she wrote was that more than 70 years ago, when she was a little girl, she was playing in the park with her friends, and a man approached these young girls on a bicycle and asked them if any one of them wanted to go for a ride with him, and they all wanted to, but for some reason, my new friend wrote me, he chose her. So she jumped on his bike, and he took for her first for a glass of lemonade, and then to an area out in the nature, and there he sexually abused her. He raped her, and she managed to get back to her home. People were already looking for her at that moment, and she was hospitalized for quite some time, and recovering at the hospital, and she had wonderful nurses. But after the hospitalization was over, when she returned home, her parents apparently had been probably in what was thought to be her interest, not to talk about the event ever. And they also told her to forget about it, and nobody ever talked about it anymore, including herself. In fact, she never told anyone for more than 70 years. And now she wrote a very detailed description of this event. And for many reasons, I didn't get this letter until a few months after she had sent it, which, of course, I felt very concerned about when I finally got it. I felt terrible in not having responded to her. But in fact, it took me yet 2 weeks before I managed to write her, because I didn't really know what to write. What do you write to a person with an experience like this who never disclosed it to anyone? But I did, of course, respond to her, and I wrote about how these issues are dealt with today. I wrote about prevalence rates, which in fact they include a lot of good news. The prevalence of children being sexually abused is much, much lower than it was before. But for many people it may seem the other way around, because the problem is so much more talked about. But in fact, there are a lot of good news. Good news when it comes to prevalence rates. Also, children who are, in fact, abused, I would dare to claim that they do get help, and parents are no longer given the instructions to try to forget or to never address the issue with their children. So such things are perhaps better today. I also sent her a book and some other thoughts. And later on, she wrote me back, or she very quickly wrote me back after I had written to her, and said that it was interesting that when she had immediately after she had written down her experience and sent the letter to me, even though she had no clue if I would ever receive the letter or read it or respond to it, she felt like a heavy load had been taken off her. She felt very relieved. And the memory of this incident that she had never described, even in words to herself or to anyone else, felt much less intrusive. She said, "Something strange happened when I had written and sent the letter. Something eased within me. The load of anxiousness felt much lighter, and the intense memories I had always carried with me felt less intrusive. Is this what therapy is about?" And when we discussed this presentation with Claes, I thought that what she wrote was very much related to what Claes has been writing about and thinking about. She's not alone in this. In my profession, I worked both with children who have been abused, but I've also encountered numerous adults and older people who have had experiences of childhood abuse. And as we all know, today there are all the time very tragical news about old cases of abuse within, for example, now the Catholic Church, just very recently again. Many of these cases are very old, and it's not a coincidence that these are brought up today. It's because the society as a whole has addressed the issue of child abuse much more than earlier, than decades ago. Decades ago we didn't talk about those events. And although it is saddening, of course, that these things have happened and that they have not been disclosed for such a long time, and there are a lot of bad things surrounding them, I have also encountered many times that it is an enormous relief for the victims of such abuse to actually address the issue, or that the issue is addressed within society. I've been participating in two investigations, actually asked by congregations to talk to people who have been abused within their own congregations when they were children, and many of them said that even though the experiences still haunt me, or even though there have been many negative consequences of them, it feels like a great relief that we are now able to address these issues. And one thing that I in particular have noticed is that many of them, I can give one example. One of the adult men who as a child was abused within a congregation by a priest that he was very fond of, he said that he had always remembered the experience. It had always disturbed him, and he had never really understood what it was about, and he had never really addressed it. It was there, but he didn't really process it very much. But when he read in the newspaper that there were suspicions about abuse in this congregation, he immediately realized that this was his experience, and he also expressed that he felt this relief, this sense of relief, that this was sort of the definition of what he had experienced. And when we then discussed about it, when he told him about these experiences later, he said the same thing as this woman who wrote me, that putting these experiences into words made him be able to leave them behind him. This is, of course, no big news to most of us. I think most of us recognize that this is the case. But another thing that struck me with him and with many others was that the need to understand, for example, the behavior of people who do abuse children, or the behavior of victims of abuse. Why don't they disclose? Why don't they immediately tell someone? The sort of need of knowledge of what science can provide in terms of what is known about these phenomena. They also seemed extremely helpful, and I think this is also a way of cognitively processing experiences. There was another letter that I received some years ago that I also want to mention in this context. A man who had heard me on the radio approached me, and in an anonymous letter, he never told me who he was. He wrote that when he was a young father, he and his then wife divorced, and she made not direct allegations, but insinuations that he would have been sexually abusing their daughter. And although this was never taken to court or processed, apparently social services found that there probably was something to these allegations, so he never had any contact with his daughter anymore during her childhood. And of course he suffered a great deal from this. This was also many decades ago, before there were the kinds of practices that we have today in these situations. And later on, when she was a young adult, this woman, his daughter, contacted him again, and they then became close. By the time he wrote me, he was already in his. He was an older man, and wrote that he now has a new partner since many, many years, and he has a good relationship with his daughter, and he has been able to set this tragic part of his life. He has learned to come to ease with it, accept that this was his life, and there are many good things, and this was one of the things that, of course, were not good, but that it he feels consolation in the fact that there are people are trying to work with these insinuations, allegations in as a professional way as possible. I think these two stories also depict very well the kind of problem we deal with when we work with, for example, old allegations of sexual abuse. That they can be the dependency on assessing whether an allegation is true or not is quite a hard one. I will return to this topic in a different way slightly later, but I think we will take some music here. Let's hope for a rainbow somewhere above all this.
When all the world is a hopeless jumble and the raindrops tumble all along, heaven opens a magic lake. When all the clouds darken up the skyway, there's a rainbow highway to be found, leading from your window pane to a place behind the sun, just a step behind the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star and wake up with the clouds afar behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh, why can't I?
Writing as a form of therapy and as a form of reliving past experiences and maybe making them easier to come to terms with and live with is, of course, a crucial part of a writer's and a poet's life. And I'm going to read a poem by Claes in translation by Rika Lesser from the collection What Became Words. When I was born, Helsinki was a medium-sized town with cobblestone streets. A few years later, the war broke out. I had just learned to keep my mouth shut. Old ladies lay strewn about the streets after the bombs fell. They were trying to kill us all. All order was gone. One furious night that came rushing down, blacking everything out. Mother carried me down to the cellar. Then she vanished. She had no eyes. It got cold and wet and dark. You felt it in your lungs. There was an iron door you were not to open. When I screwed my eyes tight, the house was composed of swinging cobwebs, and they strung all the dead from long ropes in the cellar passage. Just when a bomb dropped quite close by, mother and father embraced for one last time, as in a film adults alone may view. The sirens had gone wild. They invaded my ears through my ear flaps. Father was away all the time, though this slipped my mind. I carried my white cat into the cellar. We sat there so long it went blind, ran away. Someone found it with its head blown off in a box marked newspapers. I recognized it, all right, and I understood you couldn't trust anyone. I did not cry. I was all dried out. I seemed to take off, rise out of myself, saw myself lying there below without a head. I held my breath until my cat was whole again. It never worked. My lungs were useless. Soon I would die. We lived in the water, under a crust of ice. I was a quiet child. I shot the heads off rats with my BB gun. It was far too difficult to breathe. Something moved back and forth like a pendulum along the bottom, under the water. It looked like the remains of a little boy in knickers, frozen solid under the ice.
An airline ticket to romance.
Yeah. I want to try to tell you something about my memories from the war and from my father, and how it was to live during the wars without the father. I know that it's a very common experience for all of my generation, but I think it's still worth a thought, because it has had a big impact on our lives, I think. I was born in 1937, so I was 2 years old when the Winter War started. As you know, it started with quite massive bombings of Helsinki. And my first conscious memory is a little bit later, from the beginning of the 40s, when we were woken up in the middle of the night by the bomb attack, and our windows crashed, and the sirens screamed, and it was panic. I lived on Högbergsgatan, just opposite Johannes Church. So we children, we were sent down to the wood cellar in the yard. It was really a mousetrap, but we didn't know that then. So I went there and sat together with my elderly sister and my mother. And I asked my mother, "Is this dangerous?" And she said, No. Father is on an island outside Helsinki. He has a gun. He shoots down every plane that starts to come here and kill us. So I went very calm, and I enjoyed to sit there in the cellar, really. But then we were evacuated from Helsinki, first near Porvoo, and then to Emsale, which is an island in the eastern coast of Helsinki. To live there together with my mother and my elderly sister was very special, because my mother was not prepared to take the responsibility for all this. First, we were very anxious about what happens to my father. He came now and then to visit us on his permissions, but we always feared that something will happen to him. And my mother was really very anxious all the time. That meant that I felt that I had nobody to talk with, nobody to speak what I really felt in my heart. So I used, as very young, I decided that I must handle this for myself. I don't need any younger people, other people to help me, because my mother, it was impossible to think that she would help me. And my elder sister was so much elder than me, so she thought I was quite unusual. as a person, of course. So this was the situation, but I had good times in the countryside in Emsale, in a place with lots of horses and cows and sheep and cats and rats and whatever. So I had nothing to complain about. But then father came back from the war. I was then about 8 years old. Of course, he was changed. But as many who had been in the war, he wouldn't tell us anything how it was. I think he thought that we wouldn't understand anyhow, so it's better to be silent. Not even when he drank schnapps or whiskey, he didn't talk at all. So for us it became a mystery and also a scary thing. We had to imagine what happened in the war, but we never got to know what really happened. So that was a problem. Father, of course, when he came back, he had to try to work to handle the economy and to get food to the family and so on. My mother was a home wife, so she didn't work. So it led to that my father was not much more home when he was home than he had been in the war. He was always busy, always on his way from and to a meeting or something. And by that time also, in the business world, it was very usual with long lunches. They could ask, last in the morning, night morning, as you know. So I grew up and I became interested in the society. I became a sort of socialist, sort of pacifist. And I was quite openly, I couldn't understand my father's hate for the Soviet Union, and then I couldn't understand it. After I could. So we had big confrontations in the beginning. I once should speak outside the student house in Helsinki. It was a Vietnam demonstration. And my mother phoned me when I was going to make the speech. She said, "You must be careful. Your father took his pistol and said that he will go out and shoot this damned Bolshevik." But I made my speech. I couldn't see my father, and I didn't really think he would shoot me. I don't know. But it was raining, and father came back in a bad mood, wet, and he didn't say anything. He put his pistol in the normal place, and we never talked a word about the thing. So that was our usual thing to handle things in our family. Otherwise, it was a nice family in many ways. Understand also that he had some idiosyncrasies. I used to play football in Helsingfors IFK. We had red shirts, and that was okay. But when I played in a band and got a red band shirt, then he got very angry and said, "Now the shirt goes out or you disappear from this house." So it was quite absurd. But then my father went in pension, and he started to look at television. And it has an enormous widening effect on him. He became interested in what's happening in the world. He planned to travel around the world. He tried to get my mother with her, but my mother said it's too dangerous. So he went alone. And then we started to talk a little. He usually started to say that, how goes your car? So I answered, well, I'm okay. So that was the start. And he changed, I think I changed. And my victory was when he voted for my left-wing party before he died. It was quite unexpected. And I thought, now it's completed in some way. I think that many children that were small children during the war had some sort of same experience that I had. Afterwards, I regretted my harsh attitude. Why couldn't I understand as a young man that my father was bitter? He had been 5 or 6 years departed to the war. He couldn't see his family, his children. He sat there and everybody was afraid that something would happen to him. And then he came home and I was ironic about what he had done. So I think I was really wrong. I also admired Father Afterhands that he hadn't thrown me out. I could stay at home, I could have food and so on. So after that I have written many articles and series that I tried to repair something about what happened then. Now it's of course late because my father has been dead for more than 30 years. But I think it's, at least for me, it has a good effect. So this illustrates the motive for a writer to write. My wife, Katrina, always says, I could write much better than you, but why should I? So I think writers and artists' motivation to do what they do have their ground in a need to repair or to compensate for something that happened early in life, something you didn't have but you wanted to have. And in my case, it's obvious that I try to write a better relation to my father when I write. Many Finnish and Finland Swedish writers have a very tragic background. Marlena Mikkola, the Finnish poet and translator, said in an article that I started to write because my father made suicide. And you find similar things in many writers' history. Eva-Lisa Manner, who has written the most beautiful and wonderful poems about death and aging and those things, her background was very unstable. She never had any constant place to stay. She was thrown from one place to another. And I think that's the clue to her fantastic poetry. So I think every artist, every writer have that sort of a motive, a need to repair something, to compensate something, to make something that has failed in the life. What do you think?
I think you're right, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
And you've written a beautiful long poem about that relationship with your father, which has also been set to music.
Yes.
Are you willing to play it, or?
Yeah, but you should read it. Are you ready?
I will.
Okay.
So, this is a shortened version of a long poem called depicting the relationship Claes was just telling about. The poem has been abbreviated and set to music by my brother, Korkman, and I will give an English translation to it, which unfortunately is not poetry as it's made by myself. Remains of your body are still within me. They breathe, they laugh and cry here inside of me. Ashes, bone dust, teeth in the pot of clay still within me. You are still within me. 2 elderly ladies and a little child among the bicycles, they were left behind. I knew so well the dead were merely sleeping. They will not wake up again. Then you went away. We did not realize what you had done for us until it was too late. Your war is within me. Your love here within me. Your body is still within me. When you returned, I was 7 years. Some talked about the war, but never you. You smoked your North States without filters, and you were never there, even when you were there. But when you had retired, day by day, you slowly became more yourself, and I, myself. And slowly, I found the courage to love, and we began to find our way back from 1945.
Rester av din kropp är kvar i mig. Den andas, skrattar, gråter här i mig. Aska, ben, mjöl, tänder, damm i krokan. Av lera kvar i mig. Du är kvar i mig. 2 äldre damer och ett litet barn. Bland cyklarna de hade lämnats kvar. Jag visste att de döda bara sover. De vaknar inte mer. Sen åkte du iväg. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss. Ditt krig är kvar i mig. Din kärlek kvar i mig. Din kropp är kvar i mig. När du kom tillbaka var jag 7. Någon talade om kriget, inte du. Du rökte dina North States utan filter. Och du var aldrig här, ens då när du var här. Men efter din pension för varje dag så blev du mera du och jag blev jag. Försiktigt vågade jag börja älska. Från 1945 vi hittade sakta hem. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss. När du kom tillbaka var jag 7. Någon talade om kriget, men inte du. Du rökte dina North States utan filter. Och du var aldrig här, ens då när du var här. Men efter din pension för varje dag så blev du mera du och jag blev jag. Försiktigt vågade jag börja älska. Från 1945 vi hittade sakta hem. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss förrän det var för sent. Vi förstod inte vad du gjort för oss. Ditt krig är kvar i mig. Din kropp är kvar i mig. Din kärlek kvar i mig.
When I went to high school, my history teacher told us youngsters to talk to our grandparents who had been in the war and said that they are living history. You now have the possibility still to talk to them and ask them about their experiences. And I did, of course, as a good schoolgirl. I went to talk to my grandfather and asked him to tell me about the war. And he said, when I was 17, the first thing I had to do was to pick up the remaining parts of my friends. And then his voice broke and he could not say a word anymore. And he said, I'm not going to be able to talk about this. And he did not for many years. Only the very last years of his life, he suddenly, Pandora's box opened and he talked all the time about the war. My grandmother was going crazy. But the rest of us, we, of course, listened to him when he went through over and over again many experiences. And it was also there, I think, very clear that he somehow managed to come to peace with these experiences, having talked about them over and over again. But it took many years before he finally came there. There has been quite a lot of scientific research on memory, enormous amounts, in fact, and we know which neural parts are affected in dementia. We know about. We have very good theoretical models about long-term and short-term memory, and we know something about how to train memory. We know what stress does to memory to some extent. My own perspective is that of legal psychology, and there, I think if you sum up all the vast amounts of research there is, you can draw the conclusion that memory is complicated and quite unreliable. So that's a sort of negative conclusion there. And from the judicial perspective, it's in fact quite problematic. But if you think about it from a perspective of life, or from a therapeutic perspective, it is actually quite a good thing that our memory is so flexible, that we have this, it has this capacity to transform memories. We can go through them, we can reinterpret them, we can see our experiences from different lights. I think part of growing up actually entails reliving or re-experiencing your memories from new perspectives. And what happens to most of us, if things go well, is that we become better and better at understanding the perspectives of other people and understanding maybe their actions, even those that were not so beneficial to us. And this is something that also is the clue to many therapeutic processes in dealing with hard experiences. As a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist said, that no therapy would in fact be possible if memory wasn't so malleable, if we weren't able to change memories. Claes and I met at a funeral, and which is of course a quite strange place to start playing jazz, but we did on the request of the widow of our deceased friend, and I met this. We performed a song at the actual funeral itself, and then at the memorial, which turned into more like a memorial party in his memory, and quite an enjoyable evening full with laughter and wine and music. He would have loved it. His widow asked us to play some more, and we played for an hour and couldn't stop. And I talked to his widow, a good friend of mine, recently, and she said if he would only know what his memorial led to, that he would have been happy to listen to this. The first song we performed at when we were asked to play sort of freely after at the memorial party was Les Feuilles Mortes, which suits the memory theme quite well, I think.
Je voudrais tant que tu te souviennes des jours heureux où nous étions amis. En ce temps-là, la vie était plus belle et le soleil plus brillant qu'aujourd'hui. Les feuilles mortes se ramassent à la pelle. Tu vois, je n'ai pas oublié. Les feuilles mortes se ramassent à la pelle. Les jours heureux et les regrets aussi. Et le vent du nord les emporte dans la nuit froide de l'oubli. Tu vois, je n'ai pas oublié la chanson que tu me chantais. C'est une chanson qui nous ressemble, toi qui m'aimais, moi qui t'aimais aussi. Nous vivions tous les deux ensemble. Les pas
song that stems from for me personally very difficult and beautiful memory. Is a song that my brother wrote about our mother's death, and we were all there when she passed away in a small room at the hospice. Is it called hospice? Saattohoito. Yes, hospice. We were there for 2 days in a row almost, and she slowly passed away, and there was a very special feeling of sorrow and gratefulness and love, and I think the feelings of that evening are very well depicted in this song, and for me singing this was a big part of the grieving process. I think I sang it 50 times before I was at all able to sing it without crying, and I think that's very analogical to what grief is about. The first, you go through it many times until it becomes part of your history and something you can accept and live with. And then sometimes memories like these can turn into beautiful songs or poems for others to recognize themselves in. Sing of that evening when we meet again. Sing of that evening when we meet. I'll take your hand and you are strong and warm and whole, and we both know that we cannot run out of time tonight. It is an eternal night, I mean the night after the day when we meet again. Close your eyes and rest a little while. Just close your eyes, we'll still be here. And sand and petals on my skin, the memories, and no, we cannot be parted from each other. For tonight is an eternal night, I mean the night after the day when we meet again. 'Cause you're still here in every song I ever write. I feel you near when evening falls and I turn on the lights. I tell you all my sorrows till they fade into the night. I feel you near. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. När vintern rinner ner från våra tak och fönster öppnas överallt, då hörs det röster, vinden lekar i vår vik, och jag vet tiden den kan inte ta slut ikväll. I natt, det är en oändlig kväll, jag menar kvällen till den dag då vi ses igen. Jag har dig kvar i varje ton jag skrev ner. Jag har dig kvar, du får mig alltid söka någonting mer. Söka någonting enkelt som kan finnas i en sång. Jag har dig kvar, vi ses igen. Vi ses igen.
Jag kan aldrig ge dig bort, nej du är här ikväll. Det är en oändlig kväll, jag menar kvällen till den dag då vi ses igen.
The next song is song. Yes. I think we need to change atmosphere a little bit. The next song is a poem by wonderful Finnish composer Elina Vaara, set to music by my good friend, composer and guitarist Jukka Särkkä. And this song, The Sauna Chamber, is about my interpretation, looking back at what your life has come at, probably around midlife, I would feel, and thinking that, well, this is how it, contemplating on what life became and what is good about that, and finding comfort in what is really important, such as relationships and the like.
Saunakamariini paistaa kuu, pilvihattu ohut lieri yllä, tuhkan harmaa järvi kultaantuu, ihanasti kyllä, valon kaitaisella väreilyllä, mustuu rannan leppä havupuu. Takaluukon hiljaisen löysi sydän vanha piikkisiili. Tänne hiipi, tänne ontuen. Hämärään se piili. Orpo silmä hehkuu niin kuin hiili. Kuulletta kaumustain oksien. Kissan selkäkaaren takaa katson yöhön lumottuun. Männyn oksan lonkeroilla kiikkuu pallo täyden kuun. Kultamailla veessä makaa murtumista murtuen. Päättyy syksyn kuutamolla kesäleikki jumalten. Pari männyn oksaa liki ikkunaa. Ees taas keinuu pitkin havuneuloin. Tihentyvää pimeyttä seuloi, pilvi-illan melankoliaa. Eikä muuta sydän, näet kohtalon, näin on onnistunut näköpiiri. Vuoret synnyttivät, syntyy hiiri, pieni loukko, paras sille on. Minä, kuu ja kissa, puhelemme virkkain. Mikä lahjavainen onkaan ystävyys, aika kirkkain. Ah, kun pihlaajissa purppurainen kypsyy jälleen syys. yksin. Yöt kump kylmenevat, kuumenemme vain. Kas me yksin ymmärrämme, mitä merkitsevät marjat pihlajain. Minä, puu ja kissa, sekä myöskin kettu. Häntä loi mua alla pihapuun kirjoitettu. Saunakamarissa muutamana yönä elokuun. Minä, puu ja kissa. Minä, puu ja kissa.
I believe it's soon start for this time to start discussion, but we can maybe end on a note about the most important thing in life, according to us.
There was a boy, a very strange enchanted boy. They say he traveled very far, over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he came my way, and as we spoke on earthly things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest thing you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. in return.
I think memory escapes me now. I had planned something to say here. I think your thought has filled us all with a lot of questions and memories and emotions and reflections. And I'm sure there are people here now in the audience who would like to pose a few questions or reflections to you at this point. So just wave your hand and our student assistants here will come and give you a microphone.
I am Lauri Grön. Claes mentioned a few times transference in his speech. My question is, could we see some marks of transference in political discussions?
That was not easy. Transference indicates that the two people or a group of people they have ambition to understand each other. They want to discuss with each other honestly and genuinely, and this change of emotion, which is transference. I think it happens always when people are try to understand each other genuinely, but I don't see very much of it in the political discussions. They are mostly very projective. I mean, it's in political discussions. It's quite unusual that you listen calmly to the arguments of your opponent, and then you try to understand them and try to change your own opinions according to come closer to the opponent. And I think that's the ideal, but it's not very usual in political discussions because they are so projective. You always try to you repress some feelings in yourself that you don't like, and then you project them to the other person and accuse the other for things that you have yourself. You know, I think that's a very common way of communicating in our society. But it's an interesting question. I have to think about it. This change of emotions in political discussions. I would like, it would be ideal that it would be much more common, because it would lead to better understanding and willing to do compromises, which is the way forward in political work.
Is there anyone else who wants to have a question? There we have one.
Actually, this is not a question. I'm so happy you were here. I think I have participated many years in Aboagora, and I think this was excellent. It was a star in a way. And I'm also a psychotherapist, and I work with photos, and I as you said, literature and music is just a good thing to have reflections in your own life. And as I have noticed in my work, photos are such excellent too. But why I took this, wanted to have a comment, because we have in this room now one of the pioneers of phototherapy. She comes from London, Rosie Martin, and I think maybe she could have just one reflection, or what about Rosie? So thank you very, very much. And actually Claes has been in some of our trainings to tell about creativity and writing. Thank you. Thank you for both.
Oh, you put me on the spot, Ulla, darling. I really, really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much. I think what you were saying about transference I found very fascinating, the notion of the concrete aspect. Because in the work which I do, I work with someone else and they dare to occupy the role of their parents, say their mother, their father, and then work through the relationship in that reenactment. And they also wear the clothes, so they don't, when they see the photos, they don't feel, they can have some distance if they need, and they can embrace if they choose. And I totally agree that such work, such artwork, such writing, such therapy is based on reparation. And this is something I've most definitely worked with in my own life, as my parents have died. So the time is then right to make good on some of those difficulties, and the story of your father really moved me. Really, really moved me. Thank you.
I want to thank you. You braided your personal experiences and poetry and text and feelings into such a strong emotional experience. I think I owe you one. 50 years ago, Soviet Union came to Prague, and I left and I live in Finland, and I have discarded my language, my identity, like a limp, and locked it in the closet. Didn't speak about it for the last 50 years, not to my husband, not to my friends. And now your presentation sort of opened those doors, and I have to sort of do something about it. Thank you very much, Claes.
Maybe I can allow myself a question at this point. I am very fascinated how you work with memory, both in your professional lives as scientists and in your artistic lives in music and in poetry and so on. So do you use different standards for memories, do you think? Do you have different ways of judging good and bad memories in different compartments of your lives, or do they go together? Do you assess memories in the same ways as scholars and as artists?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think already between the professional activities we have, the ways of working with memories are extremely different, about as different as they can get, because we presented together, we had a lecture on memory last, when was it, a year ago? Something. And And when we started preparing for it, we had very interesting discussions where we sort of looked at each other and thought, this is going to be very interesting for the audience, as the perspectives really are very different, whereas memory in like symbolic understanding of memories is very much part of therapy, and it's very much out of the question in the courtroom, of course. So I think my professional perspective on memory is, you could say, very, very strict and quite maybe even narrow. On the other hand, extremely interesting, because it's a science about how to retrieve in the most how would you say, in the most reliable way possible, truthful memories without adding wrongful components. So it's a very fascinating discipline, I think. And I think in therapy, on the other hand, it's much more subjective experience, and it's not so much about what is the exact ground truth of the experienced experiences, or whether the subjective interpretation varies a lot from moment to moment. This is about something else then. But what do you think?
I wrote some autobiographical books about my life, and just to illustrate how untrustable memory is, I wrote in detail about the tragedy when I was 5 years old. I get a scar here, and it was a big hullabaloo. And I wrote it, and I always also wrote what the doctor said in the clinic, and he gave me some candy and so on. Then I published the book. Then my relatives phoned me and said, "That's not true. It never happened. It never happened at all. You got the scar in the football match much later." So I said, okay, I have a memory, very, very live and very concrete, and it doesn't happen at all. So, and if you read political memories, there you see lots of things that doesn't happen at all.
And actually, it might be added, I think quite a lot of autobiographical books are entitled in wise ways. I think Gorbachev's memoirs was entitled in Finnish something like "As I Remember It," and von Wright wrote also something like that, "Mitt liv som jag minns det," or yes, which clearly implies that this is just my subjective choice of memories and my very subjective interpretation of these memories, and I think that's as good as it gets with memory.
Now we just wait for Trump's memories.
Which of them? Which version?
Writing, it is some magical thing that if you have some thoughts or feelings in your mind, they are only hazily in the air, they are transparent. But once you take the pen and put them down, then they become true and fact. Somehow it's like water may becoming ice or something like that. It's kind of, I cannot, it's very vague thought that I got from listening to you.
I think this is very interesting, because I have often the feeling that if I don't write down my opinion, I don't know what my opinion is. So I can only have a detailed opinion when I write it down. I can have vague feelings about so and so, but I don't know exactly. So I think that's something useful to write down things. Then it gets a form.
But it's interesting, the things I've been writing diary all my life, and I sometimes think I should put a disclaimer on the diaries in case I die and someone reads them afterwards, because the person must think I had a really miserable life, because when I write it's because I'm anxious or troubled, and I need to formulate those feelings, and that helps me find out about them. But when I'm happy, it's simply happy. It's very banal and uninteresting to write about, I think. Maybe I should learn. But I don't have time to write when I'm happy.
Yes, we are catastrophe narcomans.
Yeah. how much do you think the process of using or accessing your memories has to do with vocabulary and your language ability? Because, as been said here, you somehow make your memories concrete by writing them, but on the other hand, you lock them into a certain pattern that is decided upon which kind of words you have available for you. For example, me trying to describe my memories in English is a total different thing than trying to do it in Swedish, which is my native tongue. And how much are you... I mean, well, my experience is when I try to write something down, I fix it in a certain way, which is not necessarily... It doesn't catch all the aspects of the memory, it just catches something, and it might not be... And it's a hard... let's put it like this, it's hard to get it right. I mean, it's a difficult task, and now there seems to be a connection between language and memory, especially if you try to express them, and this is not completely clear to me how anything at all of this works.
I think that's an extremely good question, and I think it's quite, well, if you think of just basic memory research, it's clear that children or adults do not have clear memories from the pre-verbal times that could be verbalized, so it's a crucial necessity. I think Wittgenstein said that language is the vehicle of a thought, and it's clear that if the better language, the better vehicle you have to express those thoughts and those memories. But I think it's very interesting to what you pointed out about the vocabulary we use, or we happen to choose as we depict our memories, because I do think that can shape the form of the memory and turn it more into either direction. And the therapist, for instance, has a big responsibility there in sort of choosing the vocabulary with which to proceed in describing a memory. And I also think many of us here have several languages in our everyday life, and I think it's for all of us obvious that an experience or an emotion can take different forms in different languages. The song my brother wrote about my mother's death, he for some reason wrote it in Finnish, Swedish and English, and they all depict, I think, very various aspects of that evening. They take on very, very different forms.
But I think we have not talked about the pre-verbal memories. The memories we have before we had a language to express anything. I mean, I'm quite sure that we have very concrete memories that are prenatal, before we are born. But they come, we can recognize them only in certain movements, our skeleton before we shall sleep, for instance, when remind us how it was to be a fetus there. I'm sure we haven't forgot anything, but we can't recollect because we didn't have any language before that. It was that the primal scream therapist tried to do. Yeah. But it was a catastrophe in other aspects.
I think you should be very cautious in working with this type of pre-verbal memories, but it's clear that fetuses, what we have been exposed to as fetuses, the language or music, we will be recognizing later on. So there is clearly pre-verbal memories, but how to, I agree, reconstructing them is bound to be very unreliable.
I think almost every pregnant woman stays before the radio and plays Bach to her children.
The old Mozart effect, that wasn't.
Yes, thank you so much for that powerful presentation and sharing your thoughts. I was wondering, did your father change his political views, or was it a token of love for you that he voted for the leftist party here?
He was not a very political man, but I understand that he was not very enthusiastic about Soviet Union after the war. And but then he invented. Then he was a businessman, and his time went to do his work. But when he got a pension, he looked at television, and saw what happens in the world, and tried to. He got wider aspects. I think really that he changed some vital thoughts about society. Because he was a man, he never told anything about his own father or his own mother, because he was so ashamed. He thought they were so poor. So I didn't know to know anything about them. But when he got older, I think he found out that also the poor people are something. And perhaps he voted for the left-wing union also to give something to me, perhaps. I don't know. I didn't ask why do you do that.
At this point, I think we should say a wonderful thank you for this intriguing and inspiring opening of this year's Aboagora conference.